Hi guys, hi, how's it going? How you doing today? Hopefully today finds you well. Today I am doing the next palette review in my palette roulette series, in which I review a palette that's been in my collection for a minute, for a while. Not necessarily about the brandest newest thing out there, but I pick a palette or two or several that are in my collection. I utilize them for a few weeks and then I come back to you. I talk to you about the good, the bad, the ugly, everything that I experienced with the palette. I show you some eye looks I was able to create, some swatches, and then we pick another palette or so to utilize and then do it all over again. For those of you interested in this, I will be reviewing today the One Size Visionary palette as well as the Viseart Petite Pro 2 new palette, and I can't wait to talk to you about them. So with that said, if that sounds like something you're interested in, please keep on watching. For those of you new here, hi, my name is Donna. I am a lover of all things high and colorful beauty and self-care, and I work for Ulta Beauty as a field leader. I get a lot of education in my position, but I really just like to talk about makeup and bring you that education that I'm receiving here. So that is what we're doing. That is what I do here. And I hope that you're here for it. Kind of a kick in the pants to hang out with. And I hope that you want to subscribe before you go. And with that, let's just roll into this palette review video in which I'm talking to you about these two palettes right here. Okay, so we're reviewing a couple of palettes this week. One being the Patrick Star One Size Visionary palette that I realized when I was doing my research on how to get it, all the Google reviews, all the things, that you couldn't pick this up anymore. And I didn't know that. I think I got this in FabFitFun or Ipsy a few years ago. It's been at this point, but this is the first time I've touched this palette. And I think that when you see like the color story overall, this might be why, right? I am not typically your like neutral eyeshadow look kind of queen. I do love the look I have on my face today, and I do like most of what came from this palette, but this is just not my bag. I am a color queen and kind of like dive into it, which might make sense as to why this has been in my collection for quite some time. The other one is the Petite Pro 2 palette, which I do believe I received in an Ipsy as well, or potentially a BoxyCharm, or potentially a FabFitFun. I'm just not sure. It has been in my collection for a while as well. I'm going to start with the Viseart palette because it is the smallest of the palettes and I think won't take me very long to get through. This is the Viseart Petite Pro 2 palette, or Pro 2. This is a $30 palette with 0.28 ounces of product inside of it, or 0.035 ounces per pan. There are 8 shades in this, 4 of them being matte, 4 of them being shimmers. The palette is considered a mini. It has this little like lever on it for you to pull it all out, and it unfolds like this, and then the shadows are inside there. Each one of these shadow pans does pull out so that you can put these into a magnetic palette if you choose. I may or may not do that. I do have one other one of these as well in my collection. They're not bad, not hard to store. I do like that they each come with a little bit of mirror and they fold into themselves and really are just a wonderful travel palette. It says Viseart on the one side, and on the other side it has like this, it looks like a conductor's chair for like a movie or something, and then on the inside of the flap it does have a sticker that tells you a little bit about the palette, what the weight on the palette is, what its shelf life is, which is 36 months, which is actually pretty good for an eyeshadow palette. Usually we get at most like a 24-month range, and then you have the pans that are kind of stuck to it. I did enjoy this palette. I had a decent time with it. I came up with some really great eye looks from it. What I would say is these are 8 shades, mini pans, 4 mattes, 4 shimmers, but Viseart shimmers aren't really shimmers, in my humble opinion. Viseart typically has a very stable formulation, leaves not much to be desired from how they're formulated. Really easily blendable, really easily placed on the lids, really plays well with other brands. As far as mattes go, they're as far as all of them go, they're typically very pigmented, easy to use, no fallout to speak of, not super powdery in the pan. They are pretty densely packed for the most part, but easy to pick up on a brush. And they last an easy 8 hours with or without a primer, honestly. The performance of these shadows are not dependent on whether you have a primer underneath them to perform. Their mattes are typically pretty magical. No patchiness, no voiding, none of that crazy that you might deal with other mattes. However, these 4 mattes down here, this one, which was the most colorful one, the one that I was really looking forward to using, was actually not great. This one was a little more firm in the pan than the rest of them were. I didn't find that it blended or built very well. It sheared out upon application, and then you had to build it up, and then as you were blending it out, it just kind of sheared out all over again. So I didn't have a whole lot of fun with the one color in this palette that I really wanted to perform. That said, I did get it to work for several eye looks. It was pretty, but it was just a little bit more frustrating than I have had to deal with as far as Viseart mattes go from past experience. The shimmers, again, I don't feel like shimmers from Viseart are actually shimmers. They're not super impactful. They are shiny, but not sparkly. I feel like they feel a little bit more dense than many other shimmers in other formulations from other brands, but they're not like heavy on the eyelids, even though they feel a little bit more dense. They are opaque. The color that you see in here is typically the color that you're going to get from first swipe on your lid. You don't have to pack them on very much to get any kind of like payoff from them as far as what their intended payoff is. That said, it's not sparkly, it's shiny. They're just typically a really low impact, but quality shimmer, in my humble opinion, for the most part. I didn't find that any of these were any different than what I would expect from a Viseart shimmer formula. Had very little fallout. They were great as far as their lasting power went. They didn't move around on the lid because, again, they're shiny, not sparkly. And they didn't really transfer. They worked really, really well on an eyelid. I found that I could put them into my crease without any problem. There was no like creasing that occurred with them, even though they are a little bit more dense, and no voiding in the crease once I got them in there. They work well with a brush as well as they do with your fingers. So you wouldn't have to like dig into them if you didn't want to, because I do think, again, because they're shiny, not sparkly, they just work well with any avenue that you want to utilize them for, whether it be your finger or a brush. I also feel like these are really creamy without causing any kind of like exacerbation of texture on your eyes. And I had a really good time with them. I would say this one is probably the most like disappointing of them, because I really felt like this one could have been a little bit more oomphy, and it just wasn't. I also feel like this one was maybe the prettiest of them all. Like this one had the most impact. I used it a lot. This palette I used so much, and these mattes don't even look touched. And I think that goes straight back to just how firmly these are pressed, because it really does not look like this palette has been touched much. I do think that this is a decent price for a mini Viseart palette. I know that I have some larger Viseart palettes in my collection that I spent like $88 a piece on back when I didn't have any business in spending $88 a piece on an eyeshadow palette. One thing of note, because sometimes brands, when they make large size palettes and then minis, I have experienced a difference in quality for the formulation of a mini palette, and I don't think that that is true for Viseart. I think the quality in these shadows is the same as the quality that you're going to get out of the larger pan palettes. Is this a palette that I would recommend to people? Sure. I do think that it performed really well, and I think that its performance would be very newbie friendly. I wasn't shocked by anything of this palette except for the fact that the purple didn't perform as well as I have experienced Viseart shadows performing. I am going to go ahead and swatch all these for you in person and then like show you. I mean, again, I just put my fingers into those formats. It doesn't even look like they were touched. This one is Petal. It is a matte light peach, and it's just a really pretty transition shade. It's kind of got a little bit of a coralliness to it, but it looks exactly how it looks in the pan. Then we have the matte coral, which is called Nectar. Then we have the matte warm dark brown called Honeysuckle, and then we have the purple, which is the one that I struggled the most with, and I think that you can see that in the swatch. It is called Foxglove. Once you are able to get it built up, it's a really beautiful shade of eggplanty purple, but it just doesn't perform super well. The first shade in there, that Petal shade, the matte light corally peach, as much as it matches my hand right here, it didn't match my skin tone on my face. So, and it went over like a white eyeshadow base really beautifully. It was my transition color almost every single day this week. And then the shimmers, I already swatched a couple of them for you, but I'll go ahead and do them again. We have Primrose. It is that first one that I just kind of think I struggled with just a little bit. It is a shimmery rosy pink. I do think that this one performs better wet, whereas the rest of them don't really require being wet to perform well. It just showed up better wet and was more impactful wet. Then we have this like shimmer like burgundy shade, which is called Clove. Then we have Cosmos, which is a shimmer brownie plum. And then we have that last shade that I told you was my favorite in the palette called Aster. And it is a shimmery rosy lavender shade. And I loved that shade so dang much. So those are the 8 shades out of the Viseart palette, and I really did have a good time with them, and I think that they brought something to the eye looks that I needed based on working with a neutral color story and not something that I work with a whole lot in my like day-to-day, right? Neutrals, again, not a neutral color story kind of girl, but I did enjoy the one size palette, but was really happy to have the extra addition of, you know, a few colorful tones out of that Viseart palette to collaborate. I don't have any like ratings for you because I forgot to get them, but I would probably rate that Viseart palette at like a 4.3. I think that it's a decent palette, marking down points because of the 2 shades that I didn't really think were the best, nor Viseart quality of standard, in my humble opinion. But I do think that it's a good quality eyeshadow palette that's a mini that could go with you anywhere you need to go, and you can pull out some really like everyday friendly eye looks from it while also having a pop of color. The second palette that I am reviewing is this one here. This is the Patrick Star One Size palette. This is the Visionary palette, the first palette that he came out with his brand. It was at the time a $42 eyeshadow palette and only available at Sephora. And each pan in here is 0.05 ounces of product, which is pretty typical. Some things of note, the packaging on this has a nice little lip down here at the bottom. And as much as I didn't understand why we did that for this packaging, it was created because Patrick Star always has like giant fingernails, and it was created so that you could lift up the eyeshadow palette or open the eyeshadow palette without much thought process, even if you had large nails. It does sit flat if you put it down this way in your shelving or whatnot, because these 2 points are the same. Like, it's not going to be wonky. I don't necessarily think that I love like weird wonky packaging, to be honest, but this one isn't like offensive, so no big deal, no harm, no foul. And I really like the ingenuity of coming up with a palette design for people that do have really long nails so that they can get it open, because you know that those nails pop off if you struggle too hard to make something work that's just not working for you. This palette has been discontinued, but it did launch in 2020, and I did receive this in a BoxyCharm or FabFitFun or something like that, and the metallicness of the palette is throwing my white balance off, so I'm gonna try and stand back here, stick back here with this. So this is a light pink metallic packaging with the One Size logo on it. I don't necessarily think that that is super cute, but whatever. It says Patrick Star Visionary Eyeshadow Palette on it, and then on the back it just has a sticker that describes to you what the eyeshadow palette is, that it is vegan, what the weight of it is, and that it does have a 12-month shelf life. Now, this has been in my collection for well over 12 months. I'm just going to throw that out there. It does come with a really nice mirror. It also bends all the way back on itself. I love this mirror. It is a very large mirror, a really nice mirror, and I haven't taken the film off of it yet, but even still, the film isn't getting in the way of me being able to see myself in that mirror, which is nice, because sometimes the film is a little too cloudy for you to use the mirror even without taking off the film. Not that that matters. This is a 15 pan eyeshadow palette, as you guys can see. Neutral with a pop of blue, pop of green, and it was the brand's baseline for structuring new palettes, meaning Patrick Star said that this would be the neutral palette and the baseline for creating more colorful palettes. There are 5 shimmers in here and 10 mattes, although the website would tell you, or not the website, all of the information that you're going to see out there says that there are 6 shimmers, but there are not. This one here, this blue, is a matte with glitter in it, and y'all know how much I hate that. This is not a shimmer. Again, I do not have a star rating on this because it's no longer for sale. Therefore, I couldn't find a star rating on it. I don't even think that I saw a star rating on it from Google, which is crazy sauce to me because you usually see at least that. This is really fun because it does have some imprints in the pans. So this pan has an imprint on it. This pan has an imprint on it. And this pan here has an imprint on it. And they are all of Patrick's head. One without a turban, one with one kind of turban, and one with the turban that he wears with the rose on the front of it, which I thought was really, really cute. The one of him without a turban kind of looks like a bowling ball, if I'm honest with you. I was wondering why that existed there, but I get it now. It's super cute. It's a super cute thought process, and I love pans with imprints on them. In addition to that, every pan in here is named after a nostalgic moment in Patrick's life. So Manila Sands is in here, Top of My Game is in here, which is Top of My Game, which is when he came out with this makeup line, this palette. Turban Legend, Him in a Nutshell, and then Matcha because he loves matcha. Mango because it goes back to his heritage. And I think that there was a lot of thought process that went into this palette. With that said, I don't think that there's anything revolutionary about this palette, to be honest with you, except for maybe there are some browns in here that you don't really expect to see in a lot of palettes and browns in here that you don't really get a lot of the times. Like this one here, which is kind of like this mustardy brown. It is in my eye look today. It's a really beautiful brown, but you don't really 100% see that all the time. This like kind of terracotta brown, you don't really see all the time because usually it's like a terracotta orange, and this sways very terracotta brown, which is different. This mango is a really, really light, like orange sherbety shade, and it kind of reminds me of like some of those like orange sherbet shades that you're like in the ABH palettes of past, right? But it's got a little bit of nuance to it that's different. I think that is the only thing that I would say is maybe revolutionary about this. It does have some browns in it that you might not see in an everyday neutral eyeshadow palette. With that said, I do think that this palette performs better over a primed eye for longevity reasons. Performance wise, I think that it blends really, really easy over a primed eye or a non-primed eye, but I think that it stays longer over a primed eye. And I also think that I know that when you do your primed eye, you really need to go over that primed eye with like a translucent setting powder or something to mattify that primed eye, because otherwise the mattes in this palette create like this weird like banding where they're soaking up all the like natural oils of your eyelid or the primer, and then create a completely different like color composition wherever that primer was wet or where those natural oils are. So for that reason, I do think that you need a primed eye, but I definitely think that you need to use the cream powder in this palette as a setting powder for that primer, or you're going to see a little bit of banding. The shimmers are best over a glitter glue. I would say that this green is this one here, and it is over the top of a glitter glue, and I think that they just perform better over the top of a glitter glue or wet. They also look very similar wet as what you're seeing, but they're not as impactful unless they're over the top of a glitter glue or wet. That said, this one is not my favorite. It's a little bit more flaky and causes a little bit more exacerbation of any kind of texture. I've been struggling with this eye for whatever reason. It's swollen and it doesn't like me much these days. I don't know why. Maybe I'm allergic to something in the air. I'm not sure. But in the inner corner of this, because I am kind of swollen on this side, it creates a lot of like creasiness on the inner corner. This one was like tenfold creasiness, and it was chunky. It would like chunk off from the creasiness or flake off from the creasiness in chunkies, and I would not have any eyeshadow on the inner corner of my eye. The last time I wore it, I'm pretty discouraged on what it looked like even a couple hours in, and that was over the top of a glitter glue as well. So I don't necessarily like that, but gold is not my favorite color to wear anyways, so that just hands down might be something to do with the fact that it's gold, and I don't love gold. But I do think that it was just a little bit different as far as composition of formula than the other four shimmers in the palette. This one I was also a little bit disappointed by, honestly, because I really wanted a little bit more from it than what I got from it. I think that it has the capacity to be a really beautiful shade, but then when you put it on, it just kind of shears out and really doesn't do anything but look maybe a little bit dirty-ish on your eye look. It's like it's a really beautiful periwinkle, but you literally have to build it up, put it on top of a glitter glue, build it up some more, and not blend it, because this is blended and you guys can see that it just looks like a shadow of like dirtiness on my skin. I mean, I liked it. It was pretty, but again, like you couldn't blend it out and you had to pack it on, and you had to put it over a glitter glue, or it just showed up dirty on your eye look. I do think that the shadows in this are very pigmented. I didn't 100% love the black, only because of the pigmentation. I do think the pigmentation could have been better on the black, and this blue was the most atrocious in the palette, in that it kind of got patchy, it blended away, it wasn't very pretty. It, of all the shades, really over the top of like a wet base, or if it meshed at all with like a glitter glue or anything like that, really changed color and became something completely in and of itself. I do think that Sparkle in Mattes does create some of that inconsistency in the formulation. I really am a firm believer that there's not any reason for glitter in a matte, because also it doesn't show up that way on your eye. It literally just looks like a patchy blue matte. I think that if you took this section of this palette away, this would be probably a really perfect palette. These three shades here are probably the most disappointing in the whole palette. Like, take these away, the rest of them are really, really beautiful. I have this whole row in my eye look today, plus the black packed onto the back side or out in the outer V of this eye look. And I mean, that tells you how impactful the black is. Like, you can't hardly tell the difference between it and the green, because the green is very gray toned, like kind of olive, and the black is also not as pigmented as it absolutely could be. This one is a beautiful shadow. This one is also a beautiful. I liked these three shimmers right here a whole lot. This one left a lot to the imagination. This one got kind of exacerbating, and this one, called a shimmer, was not a shimmer and was the most disappointing in the palette. I would probably rate this in the like 4.0 place, because I do like, when I'm looking at it again, it's a beautiful palette, but it's just not my color story, right? This palette wasn't made for me, and that's okay. But then to have these three shadows also just perform as crappy as they did, like, it's getting points because of these three shimmer shades here and this one here that I wore every single day, in addition to some of the like idiosyncrasies of the browns in this palette. But this gold and these three shades here are dropping its points. I feel like it was a good, reliable palette, as long as you were just, you know, creating looks with these 12 here. I feel like it lasted a good, 8 hours on my eyes, which is a decent wear time. With a primer, without a primer, I would say it probably lasted around 7 hours, which also is not bad. I just think that there's nothing revolutionary about this palette. Also, nothing horrible about this palette. So there's that. I don't know about the formulation of anything else that Patrick Star has, because I've not tested anything else from Patrick Star. Will I keep it around in my collection? I think it could probably be one of the palettes in my collection that's like a bolo getting decluttered kind of thought process on it, but it's not one that I think needs to be decluttered right now. But also, if I had somebody like, my mom or my sister or somebody come in here and be like, oh, I love the colors in that palette, I'd be like, here you go, take it. It's not one that I'll miss. Let's go ahead and swatch this in person. Let's do some live swatches, and I'm just gonna go across the top. And I think that you guys can see these are also pretty firmly packed. I've went ahead and stuck my fingers in those first 5, and there's not very much powder in this palette. There was truly very little fallout. It's a very clean, little fallout, blends so easily kind of palette. I just didn't love the blue. That's the one that was the worst as far as that goes for me. So the first shade in here is going to be Manila Sands. Manila Sands is a matte beige. Then we have Taupe of My Game, which is a matte taupe. Then we have Brownie, which is a matte, really deep, like espresso, rich brown. Then we have Suede Charm, which is a matte mustardy brown. I loved this color. And then we have Turban Legend, which is the matte black. And I mean, that looks really good in a swatch, but it's truly not a great black. And I actually quite love these colors all together. This made a really beautiful eye look straight across. Second row, we have Title Holder, you know, because he's a title holder. This is a shimmery, like really true gold shadow, as you guys can see. And I love this shadow. The second one in the second row is called Soft Serve. It is a matte, cool, like camely brown. Then we have Everything, which is a beautiful shimmer rosy copper shade. Then we have All of It, which is a shimmery sagey olivey green. I think it's more sage. Then we have Blue Mondu, which is the matte blue with sparkles. And again, it looks brilliant, right? It looks like a brilliant blue. But when you go to blend it out, those like, glitter bits, I think, just get in the way. The last row I'm going to do down here. So we have Mango, which is a really beautiful matte, like creamsicle, orange creamsicle shade. Then we have Booked. Booked is a matte, like barn red brown. Then we have Walnut Strut, which is such a beautiful copper. That one was probably next to the green, my favorite in the palette. And then we have Matcha, which is a matte army green, which was swatched way too close to that shimmer. And then we have Rebel Gray, which in my opinion looks a little bit more periwinkle than it does gray, but also it just didn't translate very well in an eye look. It didn't translate very well on the eye. I think it's beautiful in the pan. I think it's beautiful on the swatch, to be honest. But I think, like, when you start blending it out, it just looks like a bruise. So I didn't love it. Those are the shades. This could have easily been like a 9-pan eyeshadow palette, and I would have been perfectly fine with that. I mean, and look how fast they came off too, which is good and bad. Would I recommend this palette to, well, here's the true tea. I mean, like I said, it's discontinued. It's not for sale anymore, and I can't really imagine why it's not for sale anymore, especially if it was to be their like baseline palette. Like, I mean, 4 years is not a long time for it to be launched and then discontinued. So I couldn't find it for sale anywhere but like resale websites. So if you can find it for sale somewhere, please let us know down in the comment section, because I would be interested to know if it got discontinued for one reason or another, why that is, and if it's for sale somewhere and I just didn't see it, I'd love to let everybody else know just in case. I do think that it is a great palette. I think it was very pigmented. I think it blended well, minus those 3 shades on the one side in the gold, which I probably wouldn't have loved the gold anyways. The shadows in it are great. I just think that, again, it's just not a revolutionary palette. There's nothing about it that stands out specifically, unless it's the criticism of the palette. And you can get those colors, those shades, that like color story anywhere truly, and probably have an equal to or better formulation even from the drugstore. Like when I think of my Revolution Beauty Medium Nudes palette, I got a lot of very similar eye looks from that palette as what I did from this palette, and that palette is Revolution Beauty. I got it in gratis, but I think it's like a $9 eyeshadow palette and has the 9 shades that I would suggest that this one be cut down to, you know what I'm saying? So Like, there's nothing revolutionary about it. It is a great palette, but you can definitely get this palette cheaper elsewhere. That said, it's not one that I would ever like rank in my like, you know, end of year ranking as a bad palette. It's definitely going to be a middle of the road palette, but it's a middle of the road palette because there's nothing revolutionary about it, and it's a neutral eyeshadow palette. So with that said, I'm going to go pick some new palettes. I will be right back. I maybe am shooting myself in the foot with this because there's a lot. But I do think that each one of them is necessary to this game. So initially, I bought these two palettes to kind of like work together in a palette roulette. But when I look at the colors in these two palettes, I also think that I am in need of maybe some neutrals. So I am also going to bring in this one. So first we have the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 3 eyeshadow palette, which is an all matte neutral eyeshadow palette. And it looks like this. I do like that we do have like two cream eyeshadows here for like base reasons, that there's a white, there's a black, and there's some mid-tones in both the warm and cool variety in this eyeshadow palette. And I do think that this is necessary because of the other matte in the palette choices, which are from the Bailey Sarian and Melt collaboration called Fatally Yours. So I do think that this one has, you know, this color here, which looks kind of like a peachy cream color in the screen, but it's actually a lot more orange than in real life than it appears on the screen for you guys. So I think with these colors here as mattes and these colors here with mattes, we have everything that we need from a matte perspective to create a really beautiful eye look, right? But I also know that I am somebody who loves to have a shimmer on my lid. I do love me a good matte eyeshadow look, but I am also going to pull in the Smoke Sessions 2 palette because it's going to have those fun pops of color for me, but it's also going to have some really beautiful shimmers to use in conjunction with the mattes in the other two palettes. That said, there's not a lot of shimmer in this. I do think though that these purples are going to go pretty great with most of these colors, right? There might be like a champagne-y color that I might need to bring in or something like that, but I could also really utilize any of my single shadows that I have in my Shop My Stash or any of my highlighters really to create that shimmer on the lid. I don't know if 3 palettes is the way I should be going right now, but I also, I mean, I want to. So it might take me a few minutes to come back to you guys and review these palettes, but I'm super excited to pull these in for like everyday use for the next several weeks and then come back to you and talk about them later. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button so that you're notified when I upload that, because otherwise you won't get to see the review of it and the crazy beautiful eye looks I'll be able to create with those palettes. The one thing I love about color is it does spark something in me from a creative place, and I get a little more whimsical with my eye looks. So, I mean, this to me is just kind of boring. It's boring every day, and I cannot wait to get some of those colors on my eyes. And I think it's probably a really great, I mean, I maybe should have thought about this differently because I don't necessarily think 100% that those are really great summer colors, but here in Western Washington we start hitting fall in late August, so maybe I should have waited until October to bring those in, but I just didn't want to, and I'm excited to get those colors on my eyes. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, subscribe so that you're notified when I upload this, because otherwise you won't be. And listen, prepare for a fun dang time, subscribe to my channel. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you have any information on the palettes that I'm about ready to use or anything you'd like to say about the palettes that I just reviewed, please let us know down in the comments section. I do love having some kind of dialogue and conversation down there, so please don't forget to hit me up down there. I hope that you'll want to subscribe before you go. Let me know if you do so that I can welcome you in, personally. And with that said, I hope that everybody is doing well. I hope that you are all safe and healthy and getting along as best you can. I hope that you are all loving each other, being kind humans, and living your best life. And until next time, bye, friends.